This is kind of dangerous. I'm glad you told me.
Well,
that.
Nikki just texted, she's like, you guys are hilarious.
Oh, too funny. Now I got it.
And now here we go.
Yeah, they're sending us.
And they like the fire. They caramelize it at the table.
Alan, evidently Nate's talking.
And then you get-
Hey, Nate, how's it going?
She can hear.
Guess it's that time to start, huh?
Woohoo!
It's being recorded. All right, good to know. Hi, my name is Alan Quimby. I am an ITRT in Harrisonburg City. It's my Twitter handle, if you care to follow me on. I actually tweet some things about Google Earth and other space stuff, and sometimes just retweet stuff that other ITRTs do. But I was previously a fifth grade teacher, got into Google Earth and other GIS stuff because of the geography and geology stuff that we did in fifth grade. And I've kind of been hooked ever since. And it is just one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm just going to talk about some of the kind of the basics of Google Earth, what it is, what it does, what you can use it for. And then we're actually just going to jump in and I'm going to show you some sample lessons that I do with middle schoolers. I won't treat you like middle schoolers unless you really want me to. I can yell at you and send you to detention if you want, but I'll just kind of show you the lesson. So anyway, we'll start with what is Google Earth. And it's a lot of fun and it is a map, but it's a little bit more than that. The most important part about it is the satellite photography, which makes up the globe, and then it gets tied to the globe itself, to the topographic map that really is the Earth. And so the photorealistic aspect of it is kind of the cool part. That's a really engaging part of it. It's not just a topo map, it's the actual pictures. So when you zoom in on your school, you can see your car and kids are like, oh my gosh, there's somebody on the playground. So there is something really cool about the photography aspect of it that makes it better than a globe. Now, the other thing that it does, because it's not just a globe, it is actually very data heavy. There's a lot of data tied to Google Earth, and you can use that for cool stuff. And really, when we talk about data visualization, I mean, graphing is one of the things that we think about often, but maps really are data visualization. You're having some sort of information tied to a certain place. And actually, we call it, in the biz, they call it, I'm not in that biz, but they call it georeferenced data. So when there's a spot on Google Earth, it is generally very accurately placed on a map. Not always. I mean, there's definitely been some places around the world that, like, there have been border disputes based on Google Earth borders that really was like, come on, man, that's not really, you don't go to war over Google, please. But that's kind of how maps work in general, right? It's kind of how GPS works in your car. The map doesn't really help you unless there's information tied to it. And this is just going to be more information. This is something I made actually a couple years ago. I was just kind of reminiscing, 2019 Visty. I made this. Yeah. But this particular stuff, what Google Earth is basically a light version of GIS, Geographical Information Systems, which this is what every city and county has. They have GIS personnel and they use it for mapping, and they do really cool things with the data, like measuring distances between fire hydrants. They do things like figuring out which bridges are oldest, and so they can use maps with hyper accurate data to figure out things and make decisions around a city or a county. And it's really high-tech stuff, and it's something that, you know, we've got some kids that could definitely be pushed in this direction to go to college for this, to get this kind of thing as a job. So GIS is a really, really cool stuff. Oh, I just told you, information system. All right. So analyzing maps is really kind of where it's at. I had a professor in college, Bob Colvord at JMU, and he's a big GIS guy. He's actually like the dean of ISAT now. He's really, really smart guy. And he said one time, when you're using ArcGIS, when you're using Google Earth and you're making these maps, the map is not the end. When you make this map, you're not like, hey, I'm done now. that's just the start. The whole point of these maps is to analyze things and talk about things on the map. And so while it's fun to look at your school, the idea is there's something more to it. There's something deeper that you can get to, and Google Earth, I think, does a good job of getting you there. The other thing that I spend a lot of time talking about with kids and adults, quite frankly, is the perspective that you get from Google Earth. Your bird's eye view, which I've talked to other people. I'm like, is that the best way to describe it? And they're like, yeah, you can talk about other things, but everybody knows what bird's eye view is, right? So you're looking at the top down, and that's not usually how you see things. So I actually spend a lot of time talking to kids about that, and I'll show you some examples later of that. But this hit me a while back. I was driving back from Richmond, and I was riding back, by the way. I'm in the passenger seat. I promise. This is Interstate 64. All you can see is trees and traffic. This was what was on the GPS screen. This is a quarry, a huge quarry. Now, obviously, a quarry is down in the ground. You're not going to see that. But this is right outside of Shadwell, like between Richmond and Charlottesville. You never even know it's there, right? So this idea, and this blows kids' minds, because in Harrisonburg, there's actually an old quarry like half a mile from our middle school. And kids are like, what? That's over there? And if there are railroad tracks, there's a forest, like they don't even know that stuff's there because of the trees. So anyway, the perspective that you and kids can gain from this is kind of cool. And ultimately, not just cool, going back to my professor, he really spent a lot of time studying relationships between math and data visualization. This idea that you could get spatial reasoning skills from using maps, from using GIS, because of the perspective of it, that you can be better at geometry because you're better at maps. And how many of you say like, oh, I don't have a good sense of direction? Anybody? I know that in my family, I'm the direction guy. And ultimately, for me, when I was little, I was in Scouts, and I loved orienteering, like old school topo map and compass. And it's the same kind of skills, but just digital now. So it's making maps nerdy, right? So how do you use it? Because it really is, it's a lot of fun to look at your backyard, but there are a couple things going on. The mobile is just like the Google Earth on the web, and I'll show you that website in a minute. What I'm going to spend a lot of time on today is Google Earth Pro, which is a download for PCs and Macs. I know that's not available to a lot of students. The way that I use it is as a creation tool or a presentation tool. And then a lot of times I will create things and share it, and kids can open it on the web version. So if there's a way that if you have your own PC in your classroom, if you can have Google Earth Pro, but also understand that Google Earth on the web is what would work on a Chromebook, then I think that can kind of help you. And so when you see it, the difference is it's the same data, the same pictures, the same layers that you can put on it, but Google Earth Pro, that was fun, has more of that. So all of the layers and places over here on the side, you have all that kind of built in. With the web version, you're having to basically click on links and open it up like that. So the data part, the guts are the same, but just your control over it is a lot different. So, all right. So this is something I talk about in my other thing too. I nerd out over this. It is my favorite tool to use. So somebody will ask me for help, like, hey, what can I use to teach kids about Shakespeare? Like, have you tried Google Earth? And I just, it's my go-to thing. It's not always appropriate, I know, but it's where I get my joy is from Google Earth, honestly. And so practice is how, like when I go through this, I do it all the time and I just sit and play around with it. The controls for some people are really weird, but you just kind of have to practice. Like that's really the only way to get better at it. So I'll show you this. I'm not going to spend a million miles on it. The one thing that I'll tell you about, the orient up top with the N, I didn't know about this about myself until I started using Google Earth. I don't like looking at a map that is not oriented to the north. Like if you give me a map and it's turned to the side, it kind of freaks me out. Virginia is supposed to be like this. It's not supposed to be like this, right? So if you click that in, it will reorient the globe back to north. So that's my one suggestion that I'll tell you about all these tools. Everything else you can kind of play around with. The top one actually tilts. The middle one just moves. So you just kind of have to play around with that to figure out what that means. Everybody knows what zoom is. Places, these are places that you can mark and make or that you can get from other people. And then layers are like places, but they are generally like the old school transparency film. You can put layers on top of layers. You can have places mixed in with the layers. And these are kind of preset from Google. The places are things that you can make and find. And then the tools, again, I'm not going to go through it. The main thing, it's Google, right? That you can search for anything and you can search for lots of stuff on there. The tools, you can kind of figure them out. These are the ones you're creating things. You're adding a place mark, you're adding a shape or a path, you're recording. We can actually do some like Mars and the moon and stuff. That's kind of fun. And then this is my favorite one. This is measure, the measure tool. We'll spend some time on that. Everything else just play around with. I mean, picture of a printer. You know what that does. And again, practice this stuff. Just play around with it. Just think of something nerdy to do and then go play around. See if you can find it, right? All right. It is cool. I love looking at my house, but in school, my previous part of my job, I was in an elementary school and we did some mapping. The teacher did the school and where the kids lived around. And again, this was kind of a cool perspective thing because they didn't ever see where the school is from their house. They just knew they got on a bus and went past 10 houses and got there. So this was kind of a cool thing to get their brains thinking in a different perspective. First grade went to the zoo. So we did a little exploration of the zoo. Again, different perspective, but it was kind of cool because they could talk about like, that's where the elephants are? Oh, I remember looking at that on the computer. Live data. I'm a sucker for earthquakes. And these are live earthquakes from the past week. Really cool if you're talking, in this case, we were talking about the Pacific Ring of Fire. You're talking about any kind of plate tectonic stuff. There's some really cool data that you can get from USGS. You can just download it from them for free and it just shows right up here. It's good stuff. I said I was a sucker for earthquakes, but I'm actually more of a sucker for measurement. I measure, back then, the perspective thing was important, but I measure everything I look at just so kids can start to understand like how far things are from each other. So when we talk about how big a mountain is, we might measure the base of it and it's like, oh, that's 80 miles. I don't know what 80 miles is. So we measure from Harrisonburg to Stanton. Oh, it's like twice as big as from Harrisonburg to Stanton. So trying to giving them an idea of, again, perspective, how far things are. Starting to think spatially a little bit. Any racing fans in here? No, that's okay. This is Richmond International Raceway. So sometimes there are people from Richmond here and they're like, hey, I recognize that. Anyway, it's kind of cool. There are actually cars on the track, which is kind of fun. But anyway, that's a path. We measured it at 0.71 miles. All right. Anyway, this is one of the things I'm really digging lately, literature tours. You can find a bunch out there that are pre-made. There's some that you have to pay for, but I actually really like in the web version, they don't have Tour Builder anymore, but you can still make tours in the web version. And I actually really dig it for literature stuff. And instead of, I was thinking the other day, like I might like patent this thing, like, you know how we have a plot diagram in English? We can make a setting diagram. Okay, that's a new thing. I'm calling it. Setting diagram is what we're going to make in Google Earth so that you can follow a character's journey, right? This was from My Brother Sam is Dead. It's like a Revolutionary War thing. So anyway, we'll talk more about that later. One of my favorite things right now is I'm talking about watersheds with 6th graders, and we wanted them to be able to see. This is actually North River, runs through the middle of Rockingham County. We wanted them to be able to see that. And so I just traced it and just made my own version of the river so that I could change the size and play around with it. Took me a little while, but it was kind of fun. And then we just talked about the stuff around it. All right, KML, KMZ, not that it matters, but Google Earth actually used to be, they bought it from a company, and it's called Keyhole. And then this language is called Keyhole Markup Language, KML. Yeah, it doesn't matter, but that's why it's called KML, not GE something for Google Earth. And this site's not really the same anymore, but I left this on there because I just Google search KML. Like if I want to know local earthquake or recent earthquakes, I'll just search earthquakes KML, and Google's really good at finding those things. So now just a real quick jump. This is from the web version, earth.google.com, just in your browser. And this is my new favorite way to make projects. And so this is very similar to the tour builder. If you ever use Google Tour Builder to make stuff in maps and Google Earth. So you can create, there's a tutorial, by the way, you can create things. And so as you search for it, I made this just by clicking on, I didn't have my own pictures. I didn't have my own information. Basically, I searched for this cave. I found it. I clicked on the location and it suggested this picture and it had some information. It also would let me, and this is where I'm in my mind thinking about these literature tours, setting diagrams, that you could go through, mark your own setting, add your own picture, and write your own description. Kids could do this on their Chromebooks super easily. All right, so that's kind of the big thing with that. Any questions so far? And I'm just going to jump into Google Earth.
In the chat, they want to know if there's a presentation link.
Under my name, like it's not tied to the presentation, it's tied to me. The web link there is my presentation website. Does that make sense?
Where is the
So in the sketch, if you look at my profile in sketch, that website is the presentation link. So yeah, click on my name. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. If you click on my name, it'll one of the links. Yeah, there you go. So that's slides. There you go. Or sites. I mean, thank you for sharing that. All right.
I had a question.
Yes.
Hey, I've been getting into Google Earth Pro, and I started creating like little tours in my maps, dropping the pins, and then exporting like KMLs over to Google Earth Pro. Is it better? Would it be better to do that in the web-based version of Google Earth, like with the projects you were saying?
I don't know that you'll have as much control. It's a little bit easier. It depends. I've done that before too. I kind of like that because you can kind of make it exactly like you want it. So I'll show a little bit about the tour building,
Okay.
and yeah, we'll try both. We'll see. All right. I do have some resources. These are just some things that Google Earth itself, Google Earth Education is from Google itself. They've got some links there. USGS, this is where I get all my earthquake volcano data, and just a couple other things, just mostly from Google. So just check those out when you have a chance. All right. All right, so I'm going into Pro for now. And so I'm going to just kind of go into teacher mode for a little bit. One of the things that I like to do on either Pro or the web version is turn off all of the layers. And it's another one of those that I think kind of helps kids. Oops, I got something on. It kind of freaks them out a little bit because you can kind of zoom in there and say, there's Virginia. And that doesn't look like Virginia because Virginia usually looks like that, right? And it's not upright, so that freaks me out. I'm going to click in. So there's Virginia. That's what it's supposed to look like, right? And one of the things with middle schoolers, and this is hopefully true of high schoolers too, they remember from 4th grade the regions of Virginia, but most of the time they learned them in isolation. They didn't learn them on a big map like this. They learned them on the Virginia map. And so when I look at this with them, we talk about the coastal plain, how it goes up and down the coast. And we talk about the Valley and Ridge region and the Appalachian Plateau. The Appalachian Plateau is kind of cool because it's so big. And so if you turn on the borders, you can kind of see like this little dark green part, which is the Appalachian Plateau, is actually most of West Virginia. They just don't get to see that very often because we're just talking about this little corner of Virginia. But Appalachian Plateau is kind of huge. Blue Ridge Mountains go all the way up and down the coast, Valley and Ridge, Piedmont, all of them. And you can kind of see them using colors. The lighter green is the coastal plain, the darker green is Piedmont. You can see the mountains, obviously. And so just, again, we're kind of going back to that visualization. They're visualizing these things that they already know about, and they're not marked with, purple, green, yellow. You're actually seeing like, oh, there's the mountains. They're dark green because they're covered with trees. Now, I'll zoom in a little bit. A couple of the things that I've done a lot with kids, and I just think these are, for me, fun examples. 5th grade has to talk about undersea geography. And we talk about the coastal plain, the continental shelf. Somebody looked at me just now like, oh, you know, that's not what it's called. So this is the continental shelf. And I'll ask you, like I asked 5th graders, how big is the continental shelf? This is Virginia Beach where the hand is right now. How far out do you think the continental shelf goes? And a lot of times I'll get answers that are anywhere from, move that down here for a second. All right, so I'm going to just measure it. And I'm too old to make the switch to kilometers, so I'm just going to use miles today. I'm going to start at Virginia Beach, and I'm going to go out to the edge of the continental shelf. And again, I'm just using that light color, 74 miles. That generally blows kids' minds. Because when you talk about a continental shelf, they're like, oh, that water is shallow. Boats can't go on that. Ships can't go on the continental shelf. Well, they sure can. They actually go up the river even. So go into the bay. Anyway, that's kind of a mind blower to them. And I think it kind of helps them understand that we're talking, about pretty deep areas. And so you can actually, you can actually change the measurements here to kilometers if you want. If you're a better science and math teacher than I am, you can use metric system. Here's a fun one. I learned this just the other day. Does anybody know what a smoot is? What is a smoot?
It was a college prank at MIT. The guys had to measure the bridge. Which bridge is it? Oh, shoot. Anyhow, they laid down, and it's Mr. Smoot was, how tall was he? 6 foot?
Something like that. He was
And so they laid down and went across the bridge, and that's Smoot.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a smoot.
That was one of the things I put in the thing. I'm like, what's a smoot?
Yeah, so smoots, yeah, and I feel like the people at MIT that were involved in making Keyhole and Google Earth, those engineers were like, hey, let's put smoots in there. That'll be fun. Google has all these little things, right? Let me show you one other thing with measurement that is kind of fun. I'm going to fly into the middle of the country for a moment. Math is a really fun geometry, measurement, angles. It's a pretty fun thing. We're kind of here outside of Topeka, Kansas. And does anybody know what these circles are? These are irrigation, they're fields, right? This is from an irrigation rig. It's called a pivot. That's what farmers call it, like the pivot, right? And because what it is a huge circle. And if you get close, you can see that it actually has a center of the circle and a radius already drawn. So if you're talking to kids about figuring out circumference and diameter of this circle, you could certainly do it just by measuring. Let's not do smooths. Let's go kilometers. So if I start at the center of the circle and I go to the edge, 0.4 kilometers. I'm going to switch back to miles. Sorry, I just can't. 0.25 miles. So this is a 1/4 mile radius, so which means it's a 1/2 mile wide. This thing's freaking huge, right? Now, you can also, in Google Earth Pro, there is a measurement tool for a circle. I wouldn't necessarily show this to the kids on the first day, but it's a lot of fun to click the center, go out to the edge, and it measures it for you. So it tells me how many square miles it is, and it's a 1.59 mile circumference of this. So I think that's kind of cool. I'm not necessarily a math guy, but I dig that. You can do the same thing for polygons, for shapes that you make. The measurement tool is really fun. And that's one of those things, like if somebody had told me before I started doing this, like, how big do you think those fields are? I would never have guessed that they're half a mile wide. That seems awfully large, but, and so, yeah, in the center, they have a post, and then there's basically this rig, these big metal pipes, and every, I don't know how many feet, they have big wheels, like an A-frame with wheels, and it just rolls right around and just stays connected in the middle and just goes around in a circle. They're kind of cool. All right. I'm gonna zoom back out. I actually brought a mouse. I usually don't use one with a laptop, but for me, I don't use the zoom over here very much. I use the wheel on the mouse just because it works better for me. Ooh. All right, so when I look at our area, I'm a Harrisonburg person, so I know our area better. But when I look at this, I practiced enough so that I can kind of look at this and tell you where Harrisonburg is on this map, because I know that this is the Blue Ridge Mountain Ridge. This is the Valley and Ridge region, and this big old ridge right here is Massanutten Mountain. And our school's in sight of that. So I zoom in a little bit, and this little gray blob right here is Harrisonburg. So I zoom in on that, and then you can start seeing roads. And I recognize that this is Interstate 81, and I recognize that this is JMU's football stadium. And so again, I just kind of have done this enough that I know what to look for. And so our school's right here. This is Skyline Middle School. One of the things that is kind of cool, one of these tools up here, there is a historical data, a historical pictures setting to it. So you can kind of go back in time. There's not much. 2015, it looks the same. 2013, about the same, different cars in the parking lot, right? But in 2011, same. 2008, same. 2007, what? So the school was built in 2007, and it was in mid-construction. And sixth graders just can't fathom the fact that it has not been there forever. I'm going to go back even further. This really blows their mind. This was just groundwork. It wasn't even there yet. Okay, and then we go back one more, and it was just a field then. And so this is true of so many things that have been built recently, that you can go back and look at what was there before. And that's kind of a cool feature. I really dig about Riven. All right. The other thing that I've spent time doing, I'm going to show you just a part of this, but all right, Riven Rock Park. I don't know if anybody in here is familiar with Rockingham County, Harrisonburg City. Riven Rock Park is up in the mountains. I can tell because it's in this dark green area. And it is in the county of Rockingham, but it's owned by Harrisonburg, and it's a park that you can go out and, just hang out, stick your feet in the river kind of thing. But this river also runs towards Harrisonburg. And so since some of the kids know this park, we talk about this as part of our watershed unit. And so at some point I traced the river. This is Dry River. And so as you look at this, and this is where I really think in terms of data visualization, and this isn't data like numbers, but this is just to help understand. If this is the river and rain is falling here on these dark green trees, it's probably in pretty good shape, right? And the kids will tell me, yeah, leaves on the trees, they slow down the rain, so there's not much erosion. They soak up the water. It's a pretty good area for watersheds. And then we zoom in to as it comes out of the woods, and you might know what those are?
Chicken house.
chicken houses, poultry houses. Rockingham County used to be the poultry capital of the world at one point in its life. And there are a lot of these long poultry houses, and it's right next to Dry River. Does that give you anything to be concerned about? It does to me. Because any rain that falls here is gonna go right downhill. And the kids get it. They're like, what do they do when it rains? And so seeing it like this from this different perspective lets them kind of understand a real life issue. And so we actually talk about the DEQ and how they meet with farmers to come up with plans for their watershed. And so actually, and this is just because I have this personal example, my father-in-law is a beef farmer and he has land on a river. And so I share that they helped him with a grant to fence off the river and to come up with new places to give water to the cows. And I have pictures of those and I show the kids. So it's kind of a cool thing. Again, a real life thing they can kind of see here. And we talk about how there's this balance, right? Nobody wants to kick farmers out. We need to eat, but we need them to do the right thing for the environment. And most of the time they do. They want to do the right thing for the environment too. So we talk about what they could do. And we actually kind of zoom in and figure out that up here they have a rainwater retention pond. And there's one that we found, there's actually a manure storage facility that's farther away from the river. And so we talk about how they scoop it all up and carry it away from the river so that there's less danger of it running off. And so again, being able to visualize that's kind of a cool thing. All right, one more fun thing to show about this. The other thing that you can really see with this, so I'm going to turn off the river, see if you can trace where it is. Just try and remember where it is when I turn it off. Okay. Right. You can kind of follow the path of the river, right? Because this has a riparian barrier. I think I'm saying that right. I don't know. But it has this buffer zone, basically. These trees and bushes and grasses that follow the river are very healthy because they slow down erosion at the riverbank. They absorb some of the junk running down the hill that tries to get into the river. So it's actually kind of a cool thing. And they really dig. They're like, oh, I could come up there and trace that with my finger and tell you exactly where the river is. And you really could, because it's a healthy stream, a healthy river. So, all right, we follow the river. One other cool thing, I'll just show you this just because I think it's just a lot of fun to see. This river also runs past the water treatment, the sewage treatment plant. So some days, and depending on what group I'm talking to, we actually look a little bit at this. We talk about the other end of that, so to speak, the drinking water treatment plant, which comes from the same dry river. And so it's here on the other side of Harrisonburg, and this is the clean drinking water. And so we kind of follow the whole cycle of, the water that you drink and flush comes here and then goes back into the river. The water that rains here goes down in the river, and all of it ends up in the Chesapeake Bay. So we're kind of visualizing that whole process in a way that you can tell them, like, oh yeah, if you dump something out the river, it's going to go to the bay. They're like, okay, whatever, sounds good. But we follow the river all the way. We go past Merck, we go through Front Royal, we go past Harper's Ferry. And by the time we get to DC, they're like, well, what are they going to do about their water runoff? Because there's not a lot of trees on the edge of the Potomac River. So I think it's a good exercise for them. It's kind of helpful for them to see what's going on. So, all right. Let's take a break from that. I'm going to do two things. Go ahead and get that opening. So I'm also going to show you how I did one other layer for the water runoff thing. I'm just going to search. Let's do watershed. Oops. KML. Oh. You can tell I already searched for it just to make sure it was there. So when I click on this, this is from the USGS, US Geological Survey. They do a lot of really cool stuff. And you can download their information and use it in Google Earth. I'm gonna save a little bandwidth and tell you that I already did that. Woohoo! So. There we go. Here's the deal. Roanoke has a different watershed than Harrisonburg. All Harrisonburg's water, and actually most places to the north of Roanoke, goes through the, well, different ways, goes to the Chesapeake Bay. All of the water here in Roanoke, which is where this big dark blue space is, all of that goes to, I believe it's Albemarle Sound. It's basically Outer Banks, goes into the estuary there. So, and I kind of just playing around a little bit, you can follow the Roanoke River and it goes through a couple of big lakes and eventually makes it out to the Atlantic Ocean. Again, that's one of those, like, as kids visualize that stuff, as I was talking to a kid, they're like, well, Smith Mountain Lake, my family goes there. So that water's the same as Roanoke. And so it's some kind of cool connections they can see. This layer is a little bit weird because it's so big. I want to show you one other thing about it. Over here on the side, I'm going to turn all of it off except for land cover. Okay, so this is a diagram of what type of stuff is on the ground where water falls. The red is urban, the green is forest, the yellow is cropland, and then there's water or wetlands, because some of this stuff, Roanoke Rapids and Smith Mountain Lake, are pretty big water areas, right? But I want to show the thing that I actually want to show you on the places over here at the very bottom. This little button right here is a slider for the opacity of this layer, how opaque it is. So I think that this is kind of cool, and I actually didn't know this till recently. So as I slide this down, it gets more transparent. So I can turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, right? And so that would actually make more sense if I had a couple things plotted on this, like a city, my school, a business, and then I can turn the opacity up and down of that top layer. Then it really gives you this idea like, oh, that's where my house is. And you can kind of look at it back and forth. So anyway, that was my excuse to show you the transparency tool. But while we're at it, and just because I like talking about watersheds, I do want to show you one other thing that flips the kids out. So if I'm going to turn on the borders really quickly for this one. So if I turn on the Chesapeake Bay Watershed. So, all right, it'll take a second to load. So that's all of this water goes into Chesapeake Bay, all the way up into New York, a big chunk of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, all of that water goes into Chesapeake Bay. And the kids definitely get it that, so the farms in New York, if they spill something on the ground, that goes to the bay too. Like, yep, sure does. So it is, I think, a really good exercise in visualizing some of the stuff that is kind of abstract. It's kind of abstract for me as an adult. I'm sure it is for them too. So, all right, let's turn that guy off for a second. Again, I just found that by searching watershed KML. You can find lots of different things, just adding KML to your search. Lots of people have made lots of stuff. One of the links actually in the presentation, somebody just had a ton that he's either collected or made himself, and just, you know, you can, if you click them, they open up right in Google Earth. You can make your own copy of them and use them with your class. All right. All right, so the web version does take a little bit to move. Let's see how quickly we can load it. All right, so it had me zoomed in already. So it looks very similar. You navigate the same. There is over on the side, the map style. This is where you can turn on or turn off everything and make it clean. Again, I mean, that's not it. Like, some people don't like doing that. I actually kind of dig it because maps are different than photos, right? And so I toggle back and forth a lot, turning things on and off, so that we can kind of teach the kids that. Now, what I want to show you though is this fourth one down. This is projects. This is kind of the replacement for what was the tour builder. And so you can make a new project. And when I do that, I like to save my project in Google Drive because that way it's web-based and I can get to it from any computer I'm on. One thing that I don't dig about Google Earth Pro is that all of these layers I have on here are on this computer. So if I sit down on another computer to do Google Earth Pro, then I don't have my watershed project because it's here. Now, I can export it as a KML file and share it and open it up in the web version or give it to somebody else and they can open it up in Google Pro. But this is kind of nice because Google Earth follows me everywhere, just like Google Maps, right? Maybe that's scary, I don't know. All right, so I started this project before and I hadn't named it, but I just kind of want to show you how easy this is. I'm not the most creative at stuff like this, right? If I edit this project, and actually, you know what? I don't want to do that. I'm just going to go over, I'm going to start a new project so you can kind of see what it is. I'm going to make it in Google Drive. So I'm going to add a feature. They're calling them features instead of places. And so I can do that a couple different ways. I can search for a place. So the first time what I did is I searched for Harrisonburg and it flew me there. But I don't have to. I can zoom there on my own and add a place mark. But I might use this search if I'm doing something that is a literature tour. If I want to find the battlefield at Gettysburg, I can search for it here. So why don't I do that? I'm going to do that. Gettysburg, PA, National Military Park. There we go. That one's good. Okay. So it's going to fly me to Gettysburg. And it's already got some information over here. So in some cases, I might have to do anything. I might already have what I needed. If I just wanted to show the kids what Gettysburg looked like, I might be done. But if I want to add this to the project, now I click the button. And so over here, it has all of this information that it just put there because I searched for it. I can replace that. I can put my own information and say, no, I went on a vacation there last year and I want to use my picture. So I can upload my own image. Let's say it's not Gettysburg. Let's just say it's some mountain in the middle of Rockingham County that there aren't any pictures of. I can do a Google search for it. But I'm going to do one on Gettysburg. Ooh, Gettysburg, right? All right. Ooh, I dig that. Big cannon. It's emblematic, right? So now the image is that cannon that I just chose from Google search. Now I can write down here, this is the battle that the character in such and such a book talks about fighting in. That would be a very good sentence, I know. But this, I've got one spot on my tour made already. And I really only am doing this extra typing because I didn't want to use Google stuff. So it just depends what you're doing. If you're creating and you want to create from scratch, that Google image search, I can't get over that. Like that just makes it way too easy for me or for kids. And there we go. In this description, you can put links, which is kind of cool too. If you're doing other parts of a project, you can link that in there. Let's go back. All right, so this is an untitled project. Let's take a look. So this is what it looks like. It looks like a pin in Google, but if I click on it, it's a little slow today. Hey, there's my picture. Hey, there's the dumb sentence I wrote that didn't write very well. But I mean, that's pretty easy. Like I think actually even easier than Tour Builder because you don't have to like save it when you're done. It kind of auto saves like everything else in Google and it's just there. You can share with other teachers. Like if you guys wanted to use a grade level project, you can kind of do that there. You can also from here, I don't want to hide it. Yeah, I can present the whole thing. Hold on just a second. There's a share button somewhere. Yeah, so I can export it as a KML from here. Maybe that kind of answers your question before. And it just kind of depends how they're going to get to it. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so we'll stop with that one there. No. All right. We'll see my share button. I guess that is my share.
That's it.
Could you
Yeah.
copy the,
Okay.
could you copy the URL and
You can, yeah. There was the thing that I was looking at before. I thought it was the little greater than less than sign
Yeah.
to share. But that's all right. I can share that way too. So I know how to share in Google, but so there that is. All right. So last little thing that I want to show you here. It does have a measurement tool, but there is Google Voyager, which is some of those, I think, better formed projects are already created. Mostly you have to browse. There's not a great way to search, but some of that stuff is really cool because here's a good example. So if you go out to El Capitan, so it does this cool mixture of Google Street View and Google Earth. And then as you start going through, it flies you around. There we go. And so it gives me some information over here and I can go back and forth and gives me some pictures. There's a climber. So the interactivity of the stuff that's already made is kind of cool. You can actually create your own versions of this in that, I want to call it Tour Builder every time, but in the projects, you can kind of make that stuff and then it stays here in Google. All right, I'm going to stop talking and either answer questions, or if you'd like me to look something up here, or if you want me to try something up here. There's a whole lot more to Google to show, but I'm just going to go back to that first slide with the soccer balls. Like you kind of have to own it and you kind of have to practice. So if you have your computer, if you want to try Google.earth or earth.google.com, look up your house, look up your school, think about a project that you want to get nerdy about. I'll hang out here and either answer questions or just
The chat
Whatever.
says Egypt.
Egypt. Let's do it.
Oh, I bet that's a second grade teacher.
So
Yeah.
Alex, when you're talking about uploading a file from Pro to the web, how does that look when it comes in? Because in Pro, you had all your different layers that you could click on and off. Does it just automatically put the layers on there or?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Let's run through it. Let's try it. So I'm going to switch back. I'm going to download just this dry river. Save place as KMZ.
Yeah. The kids go play. How the bird's eye view is really hard. they know that this is the door?
I saw that.
There we go. Import KML from computer. There we go.
Okay.
There it is. So under projects, you have to do under projects, import file from computer.
And then the afternoon, I have 2 sessions.
Ah.
So well, and I only imported something with 1 layer, but there it is. And there's not a whole,
So can you click it on and off or is it just?
So that's the rest of the day.
I can hit the
Unhide it.
icon.
Okay, cool. Okay, neat.
All right. Oh, I need to show you one other thing, friends. I forgot this before. I'm going to show you speaking of dry river. One of the other things that we talk about with water is that it always runs downhill. And that makes sense conceptually, right? But there is a really cool thing called an elevation profile that's built into Google Earth Pro now. And so this is like you're getting down on the side of the river and looking at it. And so this is showing you, this is Riven Rock Park and this is Bridgewater. So this is literally showing how far downhill the water travels. So that elevation profile is kind of a cool thing that like you used to have like the professional ArcGIS to be able to do, and now it's built in there. So that's kind of cool there. I'm going to show you one other way that I've used that before. Kids generally do not understand what an island is. Usually I turn off the layer of Bermuda just because they don't know what to think about Bermuda. They freak out because of the triangle, right? But if I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to call this Bermuda. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to right click on Bermuda and show the elevation profile. And so this kind of gives them an idea like, okay, the ocean floor, it's an underwater mountain that comes up to the surface and then goes back down. So this is, I think, a really good way to illustrate them that an island is not a boat that's floating there and it's not a pillar that goes straight up. It is a mountain, and that elevation profile kind of shows them that, I think, in a cool way. So anyway, I forgot to tell you that before. That's one of my favorite things about it. So. Well, actually, since we're here already. Person online that asked about Egypt, finally getting around to it. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, so this is kind of a cool thing. And since we already talked about this, you all already know, but look what they do a lot around Egypt. They irrigate, just like we do in Kansas. This is really what they wanted to see in Egypt, I'm guessing. Here are the pyramids. They look pretty fun from space.
Can you take us down to a street view?
Yes. So as you zoom in, it kind of, actually I turned my tilt off, never mind. that kind of drives me nuts when it tilts, so I usually turn mine off. So this has street view, just like Google Maps. So if I drag the guy down.
Go.
So there it is. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of the map stuff is shared between Maps and Google Earth. So it's honestly the same exact thing that you do with Maps, but it's just kind of cool that way.
When you were talking about the historical referencing that they do, I mean, do we know how far back Google goes with their imaging?
It just depends. Depends on where they are. Let's take a look. So here it goes back to 1972.
Okay.
And actually in some of the, even in Virginia, and if you do that, I mean, imagine the photography that they had back then.
Right.
It's not very clear. You actually have to zoom way out to see what's going on. So, and it was probably not a satellite photo, it was probably an aerial photo. And here's 85, 2000, 2003, 5. So it just gets clearer and nicer. This is also fun, and actually we could probably do it here. I'm sure that there's some areas in Egypt that have grown significantly. So you could find an area and see how much growth there's been.
Have you ever done an overlay with the old maps, like the Oregon Trail? Can't remember if that's one that's on there.
Let's try. I'm going to search.
I know. We just finished Egypt.
So this actually has a lot of the stuff, but that's into the right area. So that it's in the gallery.
I couldn't remember. where.
Yeah, Rumsey Historical Maps. So this guy, Rumsey, he is a collector of like old school, like really old maps, and he's digitized them all. And I'm drawing. Thanks much.
Think you're drawing.
Here it is. So,
Yeah.
sorry, this is taking so long. So
That's what
I
was
clicked on
hoping
the
you'd
Lewis
show
and
up.
Clark map. This shows kind of a digital representation of it, and I can turn on the overlay. And so this is where that slider that I showed you before, I can kind of zoom in. This is their old school map, and I'm going to slide it off a little bit, make it more transparent, and back on. So you can kind of see, like you can find this sweet spot of like, I don't know if they got that right, or, oh, there's that same river. Look at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
So while we're on that, these maps, there's kind of a cool one. There's some DC maps.
How'd you get that layer?
So that, sorry, that I went through that really quickly. That layer is built in. It is under gallery. It's called Rumsey Historical Maps.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, I saw them another thing yesterday, like you showed it.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
overlay is so cool.
And so this is kind of cool. So this, I mean, it's just literally like remember that geo-referenced it? It geo-referenced this old school map. And so if I slide that a little, I can kind of see like,
That's incredible.
look at that.
No.
Yeah.
So
Just think like topography.
what's happened to the Potomac River? They've built on, they've added on, they've actually made it smaller because this area was not here. Now, you can add your own layers, and like if you have access to a map that somebody made, you can add your own layer and geo-reference it. That's not super easy to do, but it is possible to do. Yeah, about that time. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming today.